Welcome everybody. David here. Very excited to be sharing this conversation we had with Mike Prysner, who's previously released as a bonus episode for our patrons. You can get access to all of those bonus episodes as they come out at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We got a really great lineup for this summer. You're not going to want to miss it. So sign up and get access. It's just $5 a month, and it helps us continue to make this channel grow. Friends, we're going to be talking about Tulsi Gabbard today. We've been covering Tulsi for years and years and years. I remember even back on the Michael Brooks show days, whenever we would say anything critical of Tulsi Gabbard, we would get a whole host of freaks in our comment section complaining to us about how we didn't really understand the real Tulsi and what it is that she stands for. Well, we have the advantage of history now and the distinct advantage of having Mike Prysner, who has always sort of recognized that something was off about Tulsi, and it's a real pleasure to speak with him about her new memoir and also getting some more context about Tulsi Gabbard. So without further ado, this is our conversation with Mike Prysner. Please do consider subscribing at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Enjoy. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. David here, joined by my friend and comrade, Matt Leck. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, David. Good to be with you.
Yeah, man, and we're really excited. We're going to be tackling a lot of things that we really love on this program, but we're really excited to be speaking with Mike Prysner. You know him from Empire Files and from Eyes Left Pod. How you doing, brother?
Great. Happy to be back.
All right, we got to talk about our girl Tulsi. Where to start? So, you did a service, for the nation by reading her book that just came out. I wanted to, sort of get into that, but before we do, I have to share a little bit of news. That I think not enough people have sort of recognized that Tulsi Gabbard just bought a house near me. In Leander, which is basically a suburb of Austin, in a hyper gerrymandered district. So there's a lot of worry here that I might be seeing a lot more Tulsi Gabbard than I'd like to in the near future. And I have this clip here that I could share with you because I think everybody at this point knows Tulsi Gabbard, knows a bit of her history. We can get into that in a little bit. But there's something about this clip that really does, it hits at two different sides of the Tulsi Gabbard saga, one on the political side and then also just frankly on her grifter side. Well, let me just pull this up for y'all real fast. She was on our local news here just a month back, visiting town to do some really exciting stuff and
Former Hawaii Congresswoman and Democratic presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard's name has come up as a potential running mate for former President Donald Trump. Gabbard stopped by KXAN this afternoon and we asked her about it.
I've spoken to him. I've met with him a number of times. I won't talk about what we discussed, but my goal and focus, regardless of what happens, is ensuring that we as Americans do our part to actually have a government of, by, and for the people in this upcoming election and protect our freedom.
Now, Gabbard is in Central Texas this weekend for a fitness event on Monday to raise money for military families, something that hits close to home.
Fitness?
Gabbard is a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve and served in 3 different war zones.
Now,
unfortunately,
I need to pause this really quick because, she's not just going to be doing fitness here. She's also going to be honoring, the folks, and you will never guess how she's going to be honoring people.
Definitely lost brothers and sisters of mine who served in those war zones. We have these different workouts that are named after servicemen and women who have paid the ultimate price.
On Monday's event, Memorial.
Is that the workout name related to how they died?
It's truly bizarre, I have to say.
So, obviously, this is her backup plan for not getting if Trump doesn't win and give her a political appointment, which even if he wins, that's, probably kind of unlikely, even though she's been at the top of his VP picks for, a long time and been doing these Mar-a-Lago fundraisers with him and things like that. She has to have a backup plan because she's someone who, continually wants to gain access to power for reasons that we can discuss. But, why would she move to Texas? She's a fucking surfer girl, right? That's part of her brand. She loves the beach. She loves surfing, She's a reservist in California, and a unit out of California. So if she was going to move from Hawaii, like her home base, where she has all these connections and a surfer life and all that, you'd think she would move to California, where you can also surf and maintain your beach lifestyle. But she would be near her actual unit where she's a commander. So why else would she move to Texas? Where she is. You tell me. I mean, probably how far of a drive from the ocean?
It's a few hours. Yeah.
So of course,
but they are building a surf center in Waco. So
cool. Fitting. So obviously this is like a backup plan for her. When she ran in the primary, I mean, I think that when she dropped out of the Democratic primary, she may have tried to toy a little bit with the idea of getting a Biden appointment, which is why when she dropped out of the primary, she gave a kind of overly gratuitous endorsement of Biden, which seemed like her trying to like do a big olive branch to be like, actually, like I was with you in the beginning, like when I was vice chair of the DNC and I burned all these bridges, but you know what? I'm someone who can come back to the party and like be a party loyalist. It is before she had kind of switched brands to the leaving the Democrat Party type vernacular. But like, yeah, she came in and she dropped out of that primary with clearly trying to make an appeal to the Biden people. Once that was evident that was not going to happen, she did a quick pivot to become like a MAGA figure, which got her a job as a paid commentator on Fox News. Someone actually gets sent as a correspondent to different, right-wing stories around the country. But of course, she was always plotting her next political move because it wouldn't be enough for her to just be a Fox News correspondent. There's a real quest, which is a long-standing political strategy of the Science of Identity Foundation, the religious cult, as ex-members call it, which since the 90s had even created a body within the organization to run members for political office to try to gain access to power, which, her dad is an elected official in Hawaii. And they had long been trying to get into national office, long before Tulsi was of age to run herself, but she was very much groomed to be part of this program by the Science of Identity Foundation. And so once she realized, after the primary, it was clear that she could not win again in Hawaii. If she just tried to run to retain her seat in Hawaii or take a break and go back and run in Hawaii again, her constituents hated her. Like the brand that she built for herself that got her the popularity in Hawaii was done. It was eviscerated. There was no possible way she was ever going to win public office in Hawaii again. The idea of getting a Biden appointment evaporated very quickly. So she pivoted to try to basically audition to be Trump's vice president. And so the past several years, or the past 2 years in particular, has really been her auditioning to be Trump's VP. That's really what her book became. Her book became the document that should qualify her to be Trump's vice president. She very much has made very public efforts to try to get that position. But, I think it's very obvious to her that is a long shot, even though she's been very close to him, and that it's possible that she may not even end up with an appointment if Trump wins. And, Trump probably is not going to win, despite how bad it's looking for Biden. So she has to have some kind of backup. And so what better backup than to parachute into a place where she thinks she could win? Of course, a proximity to Joe Rogan, which she may think will help her. She used Joe Rogan as a blurb on the cover of her book and a longer blurb on the back of her book, which was not about the book. It was just about how much he likes Tulsi Gabbard. So she may think that there is an added strategic benefit to being in Texas and running. And I think this is something that we've seen
Can I just jump in, Mike?
Yeah.
I'll just say I watched Tulsi talk with Joe about that book, and Joe's number one compliment was that she recorded the audio book for it. I don't think she read 2 words of that.
Man, when I was reading the book, my partner, Abby, was like, you should just, instead of reading it, you should just listen to the audiobook. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to put myself through listening to the audiobook. But yeah, I mean, it's other politicians have done it, like Alan West, who's also that kind of crazy right-wing veteran politician who served in office in Florida, but then when his chances eviscerated there, he moved to Texas, ran for governor of Texas. And so I know you, David, are not no stranger to the parachute politicians coming in. And I think there's probably some particular advantage in Texas, right, with gerrymandering that makes it conducive for her to try to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I really do wonder what the plan is here, just because Tulsi Gabbard, I don't know if she sort of speaks like she's not a dyed in the wool like Republican, right? She's like into this like kind of Rogan verse thing, right? Which is like creating like a new kind of dynamic. But I think sometimes people really overestimate like the popularity of that kind of stuff with like traditional, or not even traditional, just like current Republican suburban voters. I don't know how many of those. I mean, a lot of the people who are watching Rogans are people who are like really mad in cities. Do you know what I mean? Like right-wing guys who are getting really mad about COVID mandates and things like that, who live in New York, who might live in Austin. I don't know how much that's gonna like play in like Burnett County, for example. Yeah,
you've seen, in her kind of post Democratic primary branding, she's really leaned a lot into like gun culture stuff, where previously when she was in Congress, she was like in support of gun control and things like that, where she's really, she's released these like fan cam type videos of her doing those like, shoot houses that you pay for, where you like, not even her own military training, but like, because she probably doesn't do really any of that in her position, but you pay $5,000 to have some ex-Navy SEALs teach you how to run around and shoot different guns and look cool on camera and stuff, and then hire someone to follow you and film it. So she's done some of that, which maybe is part of her, thinking that that's how you appeal to Texans. I've also seen like pro-gun like YouTubers like really not like her because they're like, she says she's with us now, but if you look at her history, she's just changing because and like kind of like recognizing that it's all just, she's a kind of serial brander.
This is what I'm saying. This like in Texas right now, specifically within the Republican Party, like the entire like GOP convention that they just had in San Antonio was all about, we need to weed out the Democrats in our party, right? There are secret Democrats in our party who are trying to take, and you can't literally have run for the Democratic presidential nomination twice and get away with that kind of thing. Yeah. So, what's
I want to jump in on that. You mentioned the Democratic Party primary thing, and I thought that was exceedingly revealing because you have Hillary Clinton saying she's a Putin puppet. You have people like me saying she's a plant for Zionist or like the Pentagon plant. She's kind of a pure opportunist. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. There is a genuine element of her where she has really maintained some core beliefs, like being anti-Muslim. Like even when she was vice chair of the DNC and had adopted all of the branding that was necessary to be a generic milquetoast Democrat, the one thing she stepped out of bounds with was, well, actually, Muslims are the enemy, and Obama shouldn't be afraid to call that out. Like he's being too soft on Muslims. And that's really what guided all of her foreign policy stuff of, it was like if the government was the enemy of the U.S., like Syria, but they were bombing Muslims, then, she would break with U.S. Democratic foreign policy establishment to support that. And so there's been elements of her that have maintained, a sense of authenticity, but her kind of public facing brand has constantly kind of changed based on what demographic she needs support from. Probably the most disingenuous would be the Bernie era, when she became a Bernie surrogate, 2016, and kind of rode that wave until she launched her own bid in 2020, kind of changing a lot of those things. That being the most disingenuous because she was pretending to be a left-wing progressive. She entertained Palestine solidarity stuff. She tried to present herself as anti-war while kind of privately telling people that she was very much pro-war. And so that was the most, like the lowest she's sunk in terms of hiding who she really was. But she's always, so it's a balance. She's always been Tulsi, but she's always very strategically tried to present in a certain way that she thinks she can benefit from.
Yeah. And I do think she does, to be fair to her, like, I do think she does genuinely appreciate that she's back able to, like, attack trans people. Whereas we had to make her dad apologize for homophobic stuff.
Right. Her true passion of hating LGBTQ people. It was very hard on her. She had to hide it for so long and pretend and apologize. And now she can be back out in the open.
I mean, you know, a lot of scandals around that. I mean, like, let's take it to this book a little bit. You know, which again, I appreciate you doing the legwork on it. The title of the book is very, very creative, For Love of Country. And the subtitle is Leave the Democrat Party Behind, which is interesting because I'm sure most of our listeners have seen this new thing on the right where they call it the Democrat Party instead of the Democratic Party. This might be one of the first times I've seen it like written out in this kind of way, you know, at least from a major publisher. I mean, what's going on here? I mean, this book. I mean, is this going to sort of take us through the life and times of Tulsi Gabbard?
Yeah, you would think. You know, she doesn't use the word Democratic in the book. It's all Democrat Party. You know, it's notable that she's not she calls herself an independent. So she left the Democrat Party and became an independent. I think that's mainly because that probably has more utility to Trump in a vice president is someone who's not in the Republican Party, like someone who is an independent, an outsider. I mean, all the things that made Trump have appeal in the you know, in the election that he won was that he wasn't, you know, he was running as a Republican, but he wasn't really a Republican. He was like this outsider independent. And so I think it's beneficial for her now to be an independent. Obviously, if she's going to try to run in Texas, she would probably, I imagine, finally register the Democrat Party, but a Republican Party. But using the Republican terminology, and this book is filled with it, of like the dog whistles and the cues, the verbal cues that I'm actually one of you. And every topic in the book, every issue, it's all just Fox News stuff. And so she makes very clear that I am 100% with you guys, but I am calling myself an independent because that's like kind of the utility that I have. So I think the main thing with the book is that this is her first book. She's been saying she's writing a book for like 8 years. You know, you can, even if you Google her book, you'll find like kind of placeholder postings to pre-order her book from like 2016 under different titles. And so this is something that she's trying to do for a while. And so this is her big like memoir, right? Her story, her political story, her personal story, all of that. But the big problem she runs into is that her personal story and her political story has so much that she has to hide because her personal life is 100% in the Science of Identity Foundation. Every element of her upbringing, childhood, young adulthood, everything, that is all intertwined with her being in service to this guy, Chris Butler, and being a very close, like kind of underling of him, and her family being considered, you know, I've been told by ex-members of Science of Identity as very high-ranking people in this organization. And so, of course, she can't say any of that in her book. She uses the language of God being such an important part of her life and how God being everything in her life and all of that, but she can't actually say what religion she is because that will turn off the audience that she's trying to garner. I mean, when she was running as a Democrat, her being Hindu, which isn't actually even accurate, was like a big part of her branding because that was appealing to Democrats. Like, oh, this is a Hindu woman of color is going to get elected. And that worked there. She can't do that now. She doesn't say in her book that she's Hindu. In fact, she says that she's not Hindu, essentially, in her book, which was all of her prior branding. And so, of course, there's that element of her childhood and her personal life and her personal beliefs that she has to completely omit from the book. But then her whole political career of being a loyal Democrat, of having a very close relationship with the Indian Hindu nationalist, like fascist party that's extremely anti-Christian, and that really driving or really bankrolling her political rise, which included extremely close political relationships to the point of her like multiple times meeting with Modi, doing all these things on their behalf, having members of his party fly from India to her wedding. I mean, this was like an extremely close relationship that, of course, her new audience, you know, isn't really going to like. And of course, her entire kind of career in Congress, absent of a couple things, is something that would really turn off Republicans. And so, especially like, you know, her Bernie era, her like 4 years of like kind of posturing as like part of the Bernie movement, none of that is in the book either. And so it's a memoir that has to omit most of her personal professional political life, which of course isn't much of a memoir.
Well, I mean, let's start with this with this cult, because I think, you know, a lot of people have sort of like heard about it to a certain extent, but help the listener understand like this very strange kind of religious background that she comes from. I mean, so both like sort of like what it is that they believe, and you know what this is actually meant for people who get wrapped up in it.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely a huge topic. I did like a 2-hour long episode about it on the QAnon Anonymous podcast. If you want to go listen to that, it's episode, I think, 211 from a couple years ago, where it really goes into all the little details of it. But the short story is there's this guy named Chris Butler. He was as a young guy in Hawaii, he was part of the like Hare Krishna organization, but he formed like a split. He like split from the Hare Krishnas to start his own religious organization, where he had like a decent number of young people around him that were that kind of like the Hare Krishna vibe. But essentially the basis of the organization is that Chris Butler, you know, who has renamed himself a Hindu name, is like a direct messenger to God, that he is one of, you know, he has some kind of divine communication with the Hindu gods, and that you are in that organization because you believe that he is like a direct line of communication with God, and that God speaks through him. And this was even, you know, confirmed as recently as 2019 by Tulsi, when, you know, there was some scrutiny over her connections to Chris Butler. And so there was some mainstream reporting that I think did a good job of uncovering the depth of the relationship. You know, one of the things that was found was basically her entire primary campaign was ran by members of the Science of Identity Foundation. And, you know, when she was questioned, when she was pressed about her religion during that campaign in 2019, you know, she defined herself as Hindu. She admitted that Chris Butler had told her, maybe don't say Hindu, maybe say you're trans Hindu, which is, or transcendental Hindu or something like that. But she showed one of the reporters like she showed one of the reporters like a diagram of her religious family tree, you know, and Chris Butler's on there as like a, you know, she as like a messenger of God. She was continuing to call him her spiritual master in 2019 and 2020. And so the organization, I mean, of course, there's a lot of secrecy around it. There are not a lot of ex-members that have spoken publicly. I've spoken to several of them privately, both young people and older people who joined when they were young, left the cult as people who were older, and young people who grew up in the cult and left as young adults, like as soon as they were given any kind of autonomy. The basis of the cult is Chris Butler is this messenger from God, but there's this heavy amount of indoctrination. Like none of the kids of the members go to public school. They all go to the religious schools that are run by the cult, which includes like a boarding school in the Philippines, where I think Tulsi went for about 2 years, where what I've been told by people who went to it is, and what I've heard from people who went to it is, you're really just listening to Chris Butler tapes all day. There's all these recordings of Chris Butler giving lectures, and that's kind of the totality of your education in a lot of ways. It's just listening to Chris Butler. And there's all these other dynamics. I mean, there's this, it's an organization that we know that there are child molesters who are a part of, who have been protected by the organization, international drug traffickers. Like one of the main members who was like bankrolling the organization was like busted, like smuggling heroin from the Taliban, but then possibly he was like a government agent, and so he was able to get off. Like there's all these like shady, there's like accusations of like a murder cover up where one of the children of Chris Butler like killed a snorkeler, like a Hawaiian snorkeler, and then some other guy from Science of Identity took the fall for him. Like there's a lot of like interesting stories in there that haven't really been fully explored, but are there, that kind of give an indication of some of the weirdness that is going on there. But I think it's, you know, not to just, you know, I don't want to come off as like, oh, if people have some religious identity that doesn't fit into the mainstream, that they should be like condemned. Like that's not what makes Science of Identity bad. It's the Chris Butler, a lot of his lectures being focused on anti-gay and anti-Muslim bigotry. So it's a right-wing organization. And members that I talked to who were in the organization as kids, you know, say that there's like different levels of tapes, Chris Butler tapes that you listen to. And once you get to like the highest level, meaning you're fully in the organization, it's a lot of just, it's mostly like anti-gay lectures, where a lot of these young adults told me as kids, they grew up listening to tapes of Chris Butler giving like what they call pornographic descriptions of men having sex with the intent of like making people repulsed by it and hate gay people. And so that seems like a pretty bad environment for kids to grow up in. That's the environment that Tulsi Gabbard grew up in. And then, you know, since, as I mentioned before, in the 90s, they made an effort to start getting political office to enact elements of the science of identity agenda in political office. So it's not just a religious organization that aspires to just have an organization of people, but they want to have some kind of political power, and these very right-wing, repulsive political positions, they want to try to push them on people through, you know, power. And also there's the typical cult stuff of, you know, Chris Butler being accused of, you know, lots of money, like living as a millionaire off of the dues of the members. Apparently, you know, I had been told that, you know, lower ranking members, like you have a duty to like do service to Chris Butler and other high ranking members of the organization, which means you just for free go and do his chores, do his cooking, wait on him hand and foot. There's people who have reported, you know, doing that job and Chris Butler just screaming at everyone, his wife just screaming, like just being very like kind of nasty, mean people to like servants around them. So, you know, there's all that kind of stuff there. Just give you an overview.
No, and like how involved is her family too? Because I think that's an important bit, right? They weren't just kind of small time members, right?
They moved to Hawaii to be close to Butler, so they moved the family there. And Mike Gabbard, Tulsi's dad, has always kind of been like one of the right-hand men to Chris Butler. They have a lot of front businesses, and so they have like a chain of grocery stores. They have like a store that sold like, you know, these like scam like health things, like a fan that takes all of the lead out of the air or some shit like that. So they had a business like selling that kind of stuff. Mike Gabbard was very much a part of like running Chris Butler's businesses, and also was a headmaster of one of the schools, one of the religious schools that they ran. So heavily involved in both the bringing the money into the org and the kind of indoctrination side of it as well. But when Mike Gabbard started running for political office in Hawaii, he tried to rebrand and return to his Catholic roots. And so he says that actually he is a Catholic who practices yoga meditation, which is just a strange way to describe yourself religiously. But it's a strange coincidence that as soon as he starts running for office, and then he gets accused of his opponents of being part of the Chris Butler cult, that he's like, well, actually, no, I'm actually returning to Catholicism now. But you know, they all are very, very close. You know, Tulsi Gabbard's first husband is the son of the guy who ran the boarding school in the Philippines, and then her second husband is the son of someone else who's like science of identity royalty, who like ran one of their yoga companies. And so the Gabbard family is, and you know, and also the Gabbard family like helped run her political campaign too. So like they're all in the what you would consider like the royalty class of the Science of Identity Foundation, rather than just being like rank and file members. They're clearly extremely involved.
And I mean, like, look, I mean, to get it to Tulsi, I mean, the thing that really is amazing about her life, and I guess this book, is, I mean, she's been like, you know, by most metrics, like radically successful, in the sense of like, you know, somebody who has like kind of an obscure background, kind of bizarre politics. I mean, you know, she rose up high into the Democratic Party. I mean, there's a little bit less competition there, but she rose up pretty high in the Bernie Sanders movement for a little bit. I mean, there are people who were talking about her being the next Bernie, right? All right, Bernie wins, and then she'll carry on the torch. Mm-hmm. And now she's sort of having to wrestle in the mud a little bit. We'll see where she ends up with this group of folks here. But I mean, you know, I'd love to talk a little bit about like Tulsi's kind of career in the Democratic Party, or she calls it now the Democrat Party, because it is like, I mean, would you? I mean, I would say that there's definitely kind of like clear phases, right? Would you agree with that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, you know, she's been successful because she has a lot of utility to others. But when it really comes down to herself and her own charisma and her own abilities, she's really like kind of flat and uninspiring and everything. But, you know, on paper, you know, she looks good. And so like the reason that she was so elevated by the Democratic Party when no one knew who the fuck she was, like they did no vetting of her. They didn't care at all about her background. They didn't care anything about her right-wing. It was just like, you're checking these boxes. You're a veteran. You're a woman of color. You're Hindu. You'll be the first Hindu woman in Congress. Like all of these, you know, just kind of branding things that the Democratic Party wanted. They saw that in her and they were like, all right, let's build, like, she checks all these boxes, like, let's build her up. And so, you know, that's an example. That's kind of how her entire career has been. It's like, you know, to the Trump people, Republicans, they're like, oh, this is an ex-Democrat. Like, this person was rising up in the Democratic Party and she turned against the Democrats. And like, so she has all these different, and to Bernie Sanders, it was like, she broke from the Democratic Party. She resigned from the DNC in protest of how they were treating Bernie or whatever, and blocking Bernie in the primary and things like that. And so she's always been able to find a utility for others, but on her own, she's just kind of, you know, boring and lame and things like that. And yeah, I mean, the different phases of her career, it's like she has all these branding things, but then she does also try to carry out the science of identity agenda. You know, I think one of the main things she did in Congress for many years was really try to launder the image of Modi and the BJP in India, which at the time, you know, Modi was banned from coming to the United States. It was a party that the US government was like hostile to and critical of. And she did a lot of work to launder that image and to launder Modi's image, you know, which is a fascist. It's like a neo-Nazi organization. I mean, they're straight up inspired by the Nazis. Like the founders of that, of the RSS, the kind of militant wing of the BJP, like they went to fascist Italy to say, oh, this is the kind of system we need in India. So, and we saw Hitler like, oh, what? So like if, you know, if Hitler had won World War II, India would have quickly become a fascist ally of theirs. But so that was a lot of her work. And that precisely, the reason that she did that, the only reason that she made such a big part of her political work in Washington, laundering the image of Modi and the BJP and by proxy, the RSS, the like fascist brown shirt wing of it, is because this was good for Chris Butler, because this is a Hindu movement in India where Chris Butler wants to have an ascending image. Like Chris Butler wants to be recognized in Hinduism as a messenger of God, as someone who is legitimate in the family and network of different branches of the tree of Hinduism. And so that's what drove that whole policy of Tulsi doing that. In addition to money, lots of money from them. I mean, they poured tons of money on her. But what they were getting out of it was they were getting money, but they were getting to, you know, put Butler up on a pedestal. And also because of that, they did start to recognize, you know, they did acquiesce and promote Chris Butler among their people, and also flying and meeting with him in Hawaii and things like that. And so that's just an example of how, like, while she does these different branding things, she is actually dedicated to like a core ideology and mission on behalf of this guy Butler.
You know, that's an interesting point, because you know, I think sometimes when, you know, for people who've been following Tulsi's career, or at least the bit that we've been interacting with for the past few years, can sometimes sort of miss that. Yeah, it seems like there has been some level of like motivation beyond just like pure power chasing. I mean, I wanted to ask you a little bit of a personal question, Mike, before we keep going here. Is you know, when you first started getting into, I mean, not getting into, but you know, when you first started paying attention to Tulsi,
when you first entered the Tulsi verse.
Yeah. You know, it really was. I think mainly in 2019, like I kind of was aware of her as a Bernie surrogate. And I think from the beginning, I was like, you know, don't trust this person. I mean, I think that was coming from like being really steeped in the anti-war veterans movement. You know, that's my background. I mean, since 2005, really, I've been immersed in the community of veterans who had turned against the wars, which very rarely included officers. It's different now, but at that time there was, even at the height of like Iraq Veterans Against the War and that whole movement, there was very, very few officers like Tulsi was, and mostly like enlisted folks. But I had kind of, you know, had a lot of experience with meeting people like that and hearing from people like that. And then when Tulsi came onto the scene as this like anti-war veteran, it stood out to me as not in that same tradition. And so I never really trusted that the way that she put it, you know, in her brain. Yeah, go ahead.
No, so could you just sort of like remind folks, because that's sort of like the space that she wanted to claim for herself was being like the anti-war veteran. I mean, you know, in your analysis, is particularly in that time, like situating in that time, you know, would you consider her actions as a congressperson to be like in that vein, not just coming from the tradition, but like, you know, her kind of activity and role in national media, and national politics?
I mean, in some ways, she did do that, right? I mean, she did. Eventually, she became like the regime change war stuff, which was a way to say like, I'm not anti-war, I'm anti-regime change war. But earlier on, she was very much like, I know the horrors of war, and that's why I'm opposed to U.S. policy in Iraq and think we should withdraw from Afghanistan. And so she did, you know, she doesn't have any huge accomplishments that like legislatively that she could point to, or initiatives legislatively to do that. But that's always been the rhetoric she's used, is that she wants, you know, these forever wars to end and things like that. She adapted that to become about regime change wars, which was something very specific, which was a way to say, I'm for the global war on terror. And she became very open about the fact that, you know, when she was pressed on being anti-war, it morphed into the anti-regime change war, because she was very in support of the drone war. She was very in support of the war on terror. But it's kind of this, you know, what I saw frequently during the height of the anti-war movement as like a right-wing isolationism, where her opposition to the Iraq war was not that it's a crime to invade a sovereign country and kill people who did nothing to us and try to control their government. The crime was, you know, we wasted good American lives on this thing that, you know, we should have approached in a different way or whatever. So I think that's kind of her legacy on foreign policy. It's like she's very much a hawk in the war on terror, while breaking with the Republican and Democratic parties, you know, critiquing this or that, you know, this or that war or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it was just I just remember being such a weird time that kind of after Bernie's first run, with a lot of folks going really, really hard for Tulsi, who, you know, apart from the anti-war stuff, always seemed very slippery on like almost like the Bernie project in a lot of ways too. I mean, just in the interest of time, we have to sort of get to this new chapter here, which is this Trump, you know, this kind of Trump orbit, and her return to her roots in a way. Mm-hmm. You know, could we talk about maybe the return of a kind of like anti-gay, anti-trans rhetoric, and how that played a role like in her life? And
yeah, well, like yeah, so of course, you know, that was a big part of her upbringing, is being, you know, heavily indoctrinated with, you know, really vicious anti-gay propaganda from her spiritual master. But to the point where her father and her basically led an anti-gay organization in Hawaii to try to keep gay marriage from being legalized and things like that, to where Tulsi was actually in TV commercials, anti-gay TV commercials that her dad organized. And so that's very much in her background of not just being anti-gay, but being an anti-gay activist. And even when she was in the Hawaii, like city council, whatever, the first public office she was elected to, she was still very much in that. And so, you know, even like right before she deployed to Iraq, you know, she was already an elected member of local government. And her father was running for national office, for Congress. And when he was being attacked by the Democrat running against him, you know, Tulsi's official statement to the press as a sitting elected member was, "You are acting as a vehicle for homosexual extremists." And this is like, you know, this is like 2002. I mean, this isn't in the early 90s, or like, you know, Tulsi's our age, you know. I mean, she's, you know, like, she doesn't have this excuse of like old school backwardness. I mean, so in her adulthood, you know, she was very publicly an anti-gay person. As soon as she wanted to run as a Democrat, she had to drop that, because there was no possible way she was going to run in a liberal state like Hawaii as a Democrat. You can't run as a Republican there because you'll fucking lose. And so she had to run as a Democrat. She had to drop the anti-gay stuff. And so she kind of did this, you know, oh, I was just, you know, misled as a child, whatever. Her dad ended up coming out later in 2019 and taking the blame for it when she was running in the primary, saying, oh, it's actually, I regret indoctrinating her with this hateful stuff and I traumatized her and whatever. So her dad tried to take the fall for it.
It's kind of mean to have her dad do that and then return to it. Like,
yeah, right. And so they made she had a big part of her career where she basically pretended that that was not her ideology. I mean, she gave shitty statements like basically saying that she still personally opposed gay marriage, but that she didn't want to be like radical Muslims who tell you impose religious laws about who you can marry. So that was kind of her way of staying true to herself, but compromising her position on gay rights. And so, but now it's like, now she has this, and even before she left office, like the last thing she did legislatively after she lost a primary and when she knew she wasn't going to get run for re-election, on her way out, her last like 2 months in Congress, I think there was like 2 or 3 like anti-trans bills that she introduced. So she kind of really quickly, as soon as her career was over with the Democrats, started to say, okay, immediately before she even left office, it's like, okay, now I'm going to do a 180 and actually start introducing this anti-trans stuff. And of course, anti-trans language and legislation and these rallies to protect women athletes, like all this shit is all just cover for broader anti-gay stuff. Like they're able to use like bathrooms and sports, high school sports, and, you know, gender reassignment surgeries for 7-year-olds, you know, shit, like all these kind of fake concocted things. These people are all anti-gay. I mean, they're just trying to find and they've thrown a bunch of different shit against the wall to see what would stick to enact an anti-gay agenda. But some of these like trans points have really stuck. And so she totally embraced it. 2 of the chapters in her book, she has 8 chapters in her memoir. 2 of them are just anti-trans chapters.
Jesus
and so
Christ. Yeah.
it must be a huge relief for her for so long to have to deny her true self publicly and wear this mask.
Yeah.
And now she can fully embrace it again.
No, it's exactly like how Kendrick Lamar was bottling up all of his anti-Drake sentiment for years, and now he gets to unleash it all on the world. Tulsi feels like she could actually put her pen down on the paper again.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, all right. I have a question for you, Mike, here, and if you could help explain something to Matt and I. Why does Tulsi keep on going to Africa? Because that is something that I'm always like. I mean, I get it now, you know, well enough to maybe try to mention it, but really, what's going on with that? That's always such a weird wrinkle.
Yeah, you know, I think there is something to be said about her military career that, you know, is a little interesting. I mean, she joined as a combat medic. She goes to Iraq. But according to her book, you know, she never really did anything in Iraq. She was just on a base. She wasn't dealing with patients. She had like kind of an administrative role dealing with paperwork. She never, apparently, or she doesn't talk about it if she did, but according to her book and the comments she's made, she never even left the main base. She never went through the gates, never went on a patrol, things like that. And so she really wanted to lead heavily into her Iraq War veteran branding. But, you know, as evidenced in her book, she doesn't really have stories from the Iraq War. She gets back from that and she reclasses as a military police officer in getting commissioned as an officer. Notable that in military police, that is for many years, and at that time, that was where women were having the most direct combat roles. I mean, and there's this whole kind of hidden history that most don't know about, but women who were in military police units were like frontline combatants in the Iraq War for a very long time. So she reclasses to that at like the height of the Iraq War. But she doesn't get sent to Iraq. She gets sent to Kuwait, where she does like security for royals in Kuwait and stuff like that. And then she you know, she's a military police person for a while. She doesn't deploy ever again to a combat zone, even though she says she's been deployed to 3 combat zones. So she lists Kuwait as a combat deployment, which is funny. So again, trying to lean into this brand of being a combat veteran for doing like a security detail in a safe country. But then she reclasses again. She goes into the reserves from the National Guard, but in a psychological operations and civil affairs unit, which does a lot of work with special operations. And so her deployments to Africa have been in her capacity as a commander in and civil affairs is like government, like colonial type government. Like civil affairs goes into a country and like runs the government, sometimes partnered with the so-called local government, but it's like a colonial type military role, but also commanding a psychological operations unit, which does straight up propaganda, like manipulating and brainwashing a sector of the population. Like, you know, they literally have trucks with big loudspeakers on them that go around and broadcast like propaganda shit. Like that's the kind of stuff that PsyOps does. and also waging like psychological terror on people also. So she reclasses to this job in the reserves, which very clearly you do that, you know you're going to get deployed somewhere. And so it seems that she's always tried to chase deployments in her career and the jobs and the positions that she's taken. She's someone who very much wants to go and do that stuff. So, as you know, she's very proudly posted that, I was just fighting terrorists in Africa. I think just the quick, if you look at it, what she's doing there, if you look at a diagram of where U.S. bases are in Africa, you see it's a strip from east to west across the continent, just north of the center. It's a region called the Sahel. The Horn of Africa, where Tulsi has been deployed, is on the eastern coast of that strip. Of course, there's a lot of complex politics in this region, but U.S. military policy can really be boiled down to something quite simple. Africa is a continent of colonial borders carved up by European powers. In the Sahel region, what you really have is a lot of Western-backed autocratic repressive governments where the central goal is just to extract the most amount of resources and raw materials, rare earth minerals as possible, export them to the United States and Europe, while the ruling elites in those African countries take as much of a cut as they can, while letting none of it trickle down to deeply impoverished populations. It includes some countries that are not under this boot, who are sanctioned and sabotaged by the United States. But of course, anytime you have a societal dynamic like this of severe underdevelopment, colonial borders, a legacy of brutality, there's going to be unrest and conflicts and bid for power by opposing forces. So the U.S. military mission in this region is really 100% about controlling the level of conflict so that the flow of capital from African mines can run unimpeded to American and European capitalists. So Tulsi is very much bragging about the fact that she's there fighting radical Islamic terrorists, as she likes to call it. But it doesn't matter who the enemy is to the Pentagon at any given moment. It's a capitalist war for capitalist interests. Of course, Tulsi does have like a very firm ideological dedication to that mission. Like she wants to kill Muslims, I believe. But in terms of her actual role there, supporting special operations, doing shady black ops stuff, it's all about maintaining stability for the profits of big capitalists in Europe and the United States, and also really kind of the front lines of how the climate crisis is being militarized. Because as the climate warms, the Sahara, like the desert region, is expanding, it's causing conflicts between pastoralist farmers and agricultural farmers. And these are all things that the U.S. wants to use the military to control so it doesn't impede on profits.
I mean, yeah, so she's not just, going out on vacation or anything like that. I mean,
she's probably killing people in some way. I mean, she's probably like getting informants and intelligence and part of operations that allow special forces to go in and like shoot people in their beds or hit them with drone strikes and things like that.
Well, I mean, somebody like that, I mean, I have to ask, I mean, it's very clear at this point, and we talked about it already, she's not going to be VP. That's definitely not happening. She might run for Congress here, but we'll see. I have my doubts about whether or not she'd have to be very, very delusional, in my opinion, to go for it. Do you think that, I mean, what do you think a Tulsi Gabbard would want to get from the Trump administration if Trump were to give her, a role or position?
Oh man, well, she of course wants VP because that's the highest one she's eligible.
She wants the high stuff, right? That's sort of
of course, yeah. I mean, she wants to be president. But she, I think that there is just today
Secretary of State Tulsi Gabbard.
I mean, she probably wants Secretary of Defense as like a second option after. If VP is not open, which it doesn't seem like it is. I mean, they sent out their vetting paperwork today, apparently, to a short list of people, and she wasn't one of them, which is smart because everyone else has hitched their wagon to her without really exploring her background or vetting her fully.
Oh, it would destroy Trump, I think.
It would become a huge issue because while there's been some good reporting on it at a small level, she's never been at the level where they need to really scrutinize it. And once she was, it would become the thing, I believe. The Science of Identity Foundation stuff would become the thing. So yeah, I mean, she would love to be Secretary of Defense or some shit. I mean, she would take anything, honestly. She just like, please use me for something. So, of course she would like something military related, but it's like she doesn't seem to have really much skills and abilities on her own. And so while she's a great tool, she's a great use. It's great for Trump to bring her to Mar-a-Lago to talk about how terrible the Democrats are as an ex-Democrat and stuff. Does she have any utility to them as an actual functionary in the administration? Like, I don't know.
I know. I mean, so it's like, okay, we can terrorize people in Africa. That's a skill. Not really the most charismatic person. We're seeing that with her tenure at Fox News. There is a large market out there for watching her shoot guns and doing workout videos. And she was just in town doing that. I don't know. Maybe she could start talking about seed oils, and we might see her on
also,
TikTok.
like, she's just a huge liability. It's like every team that she's joined, she's ended up burning the bridge and being like, "Fuck you guys!" Like, I'm going to this one.
Really...
Like, who wants someone like that on their team? You're just like, "Oh, I'm just going to be next if I like bring you on."
That's very true. Well, Mike, I really appreciate you spending some time with us. The episode on Rise Left podcast, Tulsi Gabbard's memoir, a book about nothing, is excellent. People should definitely listen to that to get some more info. Is there anything else where people can go to keep up with your work and everything that you're doing? I know you're a busy man.
Yeah, well, we're continuing to do content at Empire Files around the Gaza genocide. We made the film Gaza Fights for Freedom in 2019 and have been doing all we can to balance both continuing to release content on that, on our YouTube and our podcast, Empire Files, in addition to content on the Eyes Left podcast. But really, mainly what is our main focus right now is working on our second feature documentary called Earth's Greatest Enemy, which is an exploration of all the ways the U.S. military pollutes the planet and represents the greatest threat to the climate crisis. And you can go to earthsgreatestenemy.com for more information on that. So we're hoping we can finish in the next few months here and then enter the different phase of that. But that's been our passion project for the past several years as we try to balance the other things as well.
And well, I'm really looking forward to seeing that. As always, brother, it's always great. It's always great chatting with you.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Mike.